Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Permit live stream. I'm super excited today because I'm already a web developer for 14 years now. And since my early day as a developer, there was one token that I think every developer knows the most, which is the JWT, of course. And today I have the honor, together with Thomas, to host John Bradley, one of the JWT co-inventors. So if you ever heard about JWT, you probably have something to stay or listen to us today. So welcome, John. Welcome,
Thanks
Thomas.
for having me.
Sure.
It's
And I think that we'll start with an introduction. So I'll introduce myself, Gabriel. I'm leading the DevRel permit. Thomas is our solution architect. It's a lot of background around identity. But I think we're here for John today. So, John, I'll be happy if you can introduce yourself.
I'm John Bradley. I currently work for a company called Yubico out of Stockholm, Sweden, doing a bunch of different things. I'm the senior architect. Um, so I've been around identity for quite a while, starting with um, LDAP servers back in the dark ages when tokens were carved into stone using ASN1. Um, I have a history of PKI and worked on SAML, InfoCard, which almost nobody will remember, OpenID, OpenID Connect, OAuth, and WebAuthn, and now mostly working on digital wallets for identity credentials.
Yeah. That's a lot of identity and tokens career, but I think many developers and like IT architects and ask themselves, how do you build a career journey that led you to being an inventor of a standard of such a great token?
I don't know that it's something you can plan. I certainly never did. I sort of developed the thing that I needed next. So um, JSON Web Tokens and the associated standards. JSON Web Tokens are part of a suite of standards, including JSON Web Signatures, JSON Web Encryption, now JSON Web Proofs. Um, so we were moving from OpenID version 2 to OpenID Connect, and we had a bunch of people who were developing similar things to sign and or encrypt JSON objects. So Facebook had their flavor of it. Google was working on a flavor of it. Um, Nat Sakamura, Mike Jones from Microsoft, and I were working on a flavor of it for OpenID. OpenID, and at one point we decided to get together and do some of this work in OAuth and the Jose work group at IETF, so that we didn't all have six different standards all doing similar but different things. So essentially, everyone with the exception of Facebook decided to go in on JSON Web Tokens. Facebook's position was, well, why would there ever be an issuer of tokens other than Facebook? So things like issuer weren't important to them. And
Yeah.
why would we ever need a second algorithm? Why don't we optimize it so that the only issuer of tokens can be Facebook and the only algorithm would be P256? And that would work perfectly well for us. We don't need all of this algorithm agility or anything. So that's where the two things diverged. I believe that now Facebook is actually using JSON Web Tokens because even in now that they're Meta, they have much larger identity issues than the original sort of Facebook social network and Facebook, third-party apps, which was what they wanted the tokens for. So originally it was based around our needs for how to create a signed identity assertion that was more flexible than the original OpenID 2 ECDH, or well, it was essentially just Diffie-Hellman signatures, which we don't need to go into. They were ugly. So we wanted to be able to have some form of detached signature on an artifact. So originally, OpenID Connect was called OpenID Artifact Binding, modeled after SAML artifact binding. And if you're designing that, having a signed object which carries all the identity claims, like a SAML assertion, seemed like the way to go. So we did steal liberally from ideas from SAML and other identity protocols. There's a need to sign stuff so that you can later determine whether or not it's valid. And
why didn't you like the XML? What was the need for going to JSON based?
JSON was cooler. So
That's enough.
that's why a lot of that's probably the popular perception. The biggest issue was, I also worked for a number of companies like Ping Identity, which were large SAML providers, and had worked with Scott Cantor on SAML 2, Eve Mailer, and all of those folks in those standard bodies. And the thing that we were never really able to solve with SAML was canonicalization and wrapping attacks. SAML has been around for 15, almost 20 years now, and there's still, it's almost impossible to create an implementation that's secure. That somebody will always come along and discover some new wrapping attack against the canonicalization. So XML desig and XML encrypt. I mean, yes, it is theoretically possible to do it securely, but in practice, there's almost always some creative person that will come up with some way around the canonicalization verification and be able to defeat your security. So one of the big design principles for JWS and JWE was no canonicalization, which drives some people crazy. The fact that we base 64 URL encode bodies, but that eliminates such a huge number of potential security flaws and attacks, which is one of the reasons why, from an implementation point of view, more people can successfully, construct their own JWT, JWS library versus you really have to, there's like 3 or 4 people who you might want to let near creating an XML DSIG library to create SAML assertions.
What was why get joined in with the community of standards? Like a lot of the times companies will generate these things and they'll just, go develop what they need in-house and keep it in-house for what they're trying to do. What was your drive to getting into that standard community with these things?
At least for identity projects, you need to achieve some sort of critical mass, and you can't do that as a proprietary product. Our goal was to have a federated, Microsoft had the infamous Hailstorm, for those that remember it, where, all identities would be Microsoft identities. They're better now. But they did make an effort with a proprietary standard, which got everyone's backs up, and we wound up wanting to have an open standard, which is what drove OpenID Connect, where people could use a Google identity or a Microsoft identity to log into a third party. We wanted to be able to scale it, And where you have something that has to work across large organizations, it really has to be part of an open standard. So SAML also was an open standard, XML DSIG, XML encrypt, which are really no longer being worked on. Are were open standards. So those still exist in enterprise and research and education. Though I'm also on the technical advisory board for Internet 2. So research and education is also looking at now migrating over to OpenID Connect and or digital identity wallets.
Have JWTs in your lifetime, like and all these different tokens that we are able to pass around, has anything been as successful as the JWT? Is this still something, or have we reached a mass adoption here to where you feel like we've gotten to where we need to achieve some of these security things you're talking about?
Well, until you guys invited me to this podcast, I never really thought about JWT being successful, honestly. I'm sure there's some Gartner graph that tells me that we're out of the trough and into. I actually did see one a few days ago around OpenID Connect and various other protocols where things that are actually into the stable deployment phase. That you have the initial hype, then you have lowered expectation as people initially deploy and become disillusioned, then slow acceptance, and then eventually plateauing out into stable deployment. And I'm guessing that JWTs have sort of, well, at least the standard JWS, JWE flavors have sort of, they're everywhere from door lock systems to Xbox to, like in the core of 5G networks. And I don't know, it was never a plan to take over all of the internet infrastructure, but you make a useful tool, it's free, open, and people go, oh yeah, I'll just use that. It's not like God hasn't, or JWS hasn't had its controversies like algorithm none, which I blame entirely on T-Mobile or Deutsche Telekom for why we did that. But
what happened there?
Well, back in the early days when we were first, trying to get traction, so in OpenID Connect, there's a code flow where you get the identity token from the token endpoint.
Right.
And Deutsche Telekom's, hi Torsten, if you're listening, Deutsche Telekom's position at the time was, look, getting the signature, getting the validation key over TLS, and then going to another endpoint, and then over TLS and validating the signature based on the original certificate was extra work. And since they were doing millions of authentications a day because this was core infrastructure, we wanted to have a standard response, which was JSON Web Token, but they didn't want the extra overhead of having to sign all of them because essentially all of the security was being provided by the TLS. Because if you're talking to the wrong token endpoint, you're in a lot of trouble anyways. So they wanted to rely entirely on the TLS security, which was not completely unreasonable. But in order to do that, we had to create a way of having a JWT structure, or JWS, but not forcing them to actually do the ECDSA signature. So that was where algorithm none came from. So it sort of made sense in a deployment case, but then once you start to getting broader stuff, people came up with attacks. People built libraries where you could, if people weren't checking the algorithm and for a particular sender, you could override the signature by saying, yes, this is signed by algorithm none, and people with bad implementations would then accept it. So, we have, gone back and given deployment guidance around some of these things, but the reason for algorithm none made sense initially, but wound up causing problems in broader deployments.
I
Don't
think
implement
what
algorithm none. Understood. Don't accept algorithm none.
Right. Unless you really, really know that you want to. So it's most libraries won't process it, but I mean, you still have, if you take somebody's word for how they should be signing, there's always algorithm downgrade attacks, etc., that you might be susceptible to. You really should have some out of band method like metadata to know, yes, I've negotiated that guy's always going to be signing with ECDSA P384, etc. Don't just take whatever they say is their algorithm.
How do you feel like a lot of this success I'd see on JWTs, and like a lot of where people in the identity world, when you hear JWT, they think OAuth, they think OIDC, and they think identity based. And so there's a lot of confusion, I think, with what OAuth and OIDC does. We're starting to kind of get the separation of authorization and authentication and those things kind of figured out in the market. Do you see, like, I know they've accelerated some of this. Are there things outside of that you've seen, like, man, there's an awesome use for JWT that nobody's doing? I wish, like, my intent was maybe more on this, and it's gone and it's blown up in these other areas. Or is JWT specifically designed to help some of these things?
Well, I mean, lots of people have used it in ways that I would have never anticipated, but that's generally what happens with any successful standard is you get people, doing their own takes on it and using it for things that you hadn't anticipated, like Xbox authentication or 5G core networks and door locks and lots of other things that I've seen. I mean, it's a bit of plumbing that's generally useful, so people will find useful things to do with plumbing. Like I say, now the thing that the newer things that we're focusing on are still identity focused, but around providing selective disclosure for things like, so JWTs are also used a lot in supply chain management. How do you create a bill of lading? How do you may not want to disclose, if people are familiar with, I have a driver's license and I only want to disclose my, that I'm over 18. I don't want to, give additional information. So there's always those sort of driver's license, identity document use cases, but there's a lot of commercial stuff where, you may have a bill of lading, but you don't necessarily want to disclose all of the details to all of the people who are handling that shipment along the way. You may want to selectively disclose part of, different things to different people who are entitled to know that knowledge, etc. But you want to have a generic document that you can then present. So we've developed again in the OAuth work group, where JWT was originally created. We created selective disclosure JWT, and Christina Yasuda has been working on that. She was at Microsoft and is now working for the German government on their identity projects. So that's now being used in mobile driver's licenses and a bunch of different places. So if you have an application that's using a mobile driver's license, there's two formats, MDoc and SDJWT. So different places will quite often support both, depending upon how it's being presented, so that people can hide different parts or selectively disclose parts of their information. And again, in supply chain, that is also being used. There's zero knowledge proof cryptography, which we're developing in the Jose work group, which I'm co-chair of still, um, um, around being able to apply things like BBS plus, um, elliptic curve proofs, um, to be able
Yeah.
to do that same sort of cryptographic binding, but with newer algorithms that are more efficient. So,
Yeah. I want to take a phrase back to you mentioned like this Gartner graphs, right? About like mass adoption and stuff like that. And I think there is another perspective to the JOT being successful. So if you look at the timeline of identity, the main of the work of identity and standard was more for workforce identity because there's where the money is, right? You have an IT, you have users in your organization, you have confidential data that you need to protect on. And at some point in time, I think if I'm looking on years, it was like between 2008 to 2012, where internet identity got a huge jump in the number of the users, the confidentiality of the data that they have, and the way that you want to protect them. And
mhm,
while many other standards like OIDC and even like Scheme and some other like identity standard never crossed the way from the workforce and from the like internal IT identity to the internet identity, the JOT from the first day, I think Auth0 very contributed to that,
mhm.
being maybe the only identity standard that the usual the web developer knows about it. Do you thought of, I mean, when you work in the job, you were like more for the workforce one. Do you thought it will be so trending in for the
I
internet identity?
no, our initial use case was internet identity. Um, not We weren't really focused on workforce. We were, again, the partners that were working on it were Google and Microsoft and
Mhm.
Facebook. Um, so it was always intended to um, be for
So I
as
mean,
part of consumer identity deployment.
so if you look at this perspective, it's probably Jot is successful 100 times than any kind of other identity standard. The usual, the common web developer know one identity standard, the token that they use. They don't know. Maybe some of them knows OAuth, but today they don't even know that because someone else did the OAuth work for them.
Right.
OIDC is something that you know if you are very focused on connecting your SaaS to some enterprise application, etc.
Mhm.
So I think you can't say that JOT is not successful, assuming that that's the only identity standard that internet developers know, right?
Yeah, it's not, again, it's a bit of plumbing, and internet developers have managed to create lots of other things with it. But yeah, our original design goals, I have, from my background in SAML and various other things, I put, you know, a lot of things like, um, originally it was designed to have a confirmation method and be able to do proof of possession when, you know, like many things, um, you know, in the JOT standards, there were a bunch of things that everybody said, no, we don't need that. No, we don't need that extensibility. Nobody's ever going to use it. Doesn't make any sense. But now, in all of the banking, international banking systems that are all using FAPI and other JOT-based authentication systems, it's all using proof of possession JOTs. If we hadn't you know planned on you know having a way of doing holder binding, we wouldn't now be being deployed with identity wallets and banking and all of those other things. So on based on experience, we included some things speculatively that people didn't want initially, which have wound up becoming popular. But our main goal was to keep it as simple as possible so that we could meet the requirements of web developers, so that if you wanted to use Google as an identity provider, you could write your own library to connect to them as a relying party. So we wanted to keep it as simple as possible for the simple use cases, but still enable the more complex ones.
Yeah.
And it seems like part of that success was, I mean, at least for the developers and that sort of thing, it was the social authentication, accepting kind of the OIDC flow. Google kind of pioneered some of the OAuth stuff, protecting the APIs, and primarily used JWT type things. So I think like all of these things happening all together at once launched the underlying success of the JWT to be used. We see a lot, like when we titled this "You've Got a JWT Now What," mainly because people are like, okay, I've done my identity verification, I've authenticated my user. Should all of my identity data store be inside the JWT? Because some people do that. Some people take all the information about a user and throw it in the JWT and pass them around. Some people keep them long lived. Some people like want to like look up additional systems, webhooks, and put in full fine grained entitlements on it. Where do you see kind of those things? Like where have we crossed the line in some of the uses there?
Well, I don't know. Those are things that I probably wouldn't have thought of myself, because I'm more focused on APIs. But when you have some of these micro architectures where you want to maintain integrity protection, sure, using the JWT as a container format to integrity protect information that you want to keep around in local storage, or especially in the browser, makes sense. Um,
There was like
yeah.
a known Twitter like fight a couple of weeks ago regarding saving JWTs in local storage. Yes or not? People were very opinionated. I mean, you should keep that. You should not keep that.
Well, I mean, there's with any there's obviously privacy and security considerations. Is it a shared computer, and so on and so forth. Um, yeah, I'm currently working on a project with the universities across Europe called WW Wallet, which is a progressive web app that acts as an identity wallet for potentially EIDs and academic credentials, etc. And stuff is stored in the stored and encrypted. So the we use the PRF extension from FIDO to locally encrypt and decrypt essentially JWTs, which are then stored in the central server, and signed objects are kept in local storage temporarily, etc. So um, you know
You're not again.
if it works for the application, it's probably okay, as long as you understand all of the security information issues, etc. Well, because local storage isn't, could be leaked. There's all sorts of XSS things that can be used to exfiltrate. So, um, you know, there are some other interesting things that talking to Google and Microsoft about around being able to do hardware signing of cookies and various other objects that are stored so that a website can essentially know that, be able to detect if a signed object, typically a JWT, has been exfiltrated to a different system.
Interesting.
Some interesting
Is this,
things being worked on there.
I mean, with your work at Yubico, like, so is this, are you seeing, like, is JWT being used for some of these physical tokens and underlying, like in the world, not just with YubiKey and what you're doing with YubiKey at Yubico, but is there, like, how is JWTs getting pushed into this physical world? Because you're talking about physical locks now. Are those just communication mechanisms and signature verifications, or is there like a correlation between the software JWT that's now powering people to think about physical tokens differently?
So there is So at the application level, most things are using JWTs for FIDO and WebAuthn. We actually use something called a CWT, a CBOR web token, which is like a JWT, but rather than JSON encoded, it's CBOR encoded because a lot of the embedded devices, um, you know, and IoT protocols have significant space considerations. You need to, fit things in a single packet, etc. So, over time we have developed a space-saving version of JWT, which has more or less the same rules, but different encoding rules. So, so we've gone back to binary encoding, but without the canonicalization issues. So,
is there more uses there? I mean, or is that constrained? Probably not in the web. Like the web has some constraints on fat tokens, but mostly not. Is there going to be adoption of this? And is this an open protocol you're working as well?
Oh yeah. So CWT. So there is a working group at IETF on that. So it's used in a lot of things, especially IoT devices. Some people that are familiar with IoT and those protocols are probably more familiar with CWTs as opposed to JWTs, but essentially it's the same registry, the same sort of claims, etc. But again, there's different encoding, slightly different encoding issues. So we try and develop the CBOR encoding and signing encryption, etc., in parallel with the JSON one. So there's two different work groups at IETF, and so Jose is working on the JSON working group is working on zero knowledge proofs mechanisms, but as part of those specs, we also write the transforms for the CBOR encoding, and the CBOR work group is working on post-quantum issues, and they're doing the Jose transforms.
Okay.
So that
let's double click on that some. Like what's going to happen here? What do you project out for these, like especially around the encryption and cryptography component of the world in the future?
Well, we're eventually going to have to move to post-quantum algorithms. We have this interesting sort of race condition where we have the zero knowledge proofs being developed for people's privacy at the same time as all of the current zero knowledge proof algorithms are about to hit the post-quantum apocalypse, because they're all the ones that are currently deployed are based on elliptic curve cryptography. So we have, the quantum apocalypse is going to have big impacts on a large number of things. One of the first things that I tell developers is that you have to think about algorithm agility, because before you want to deploy post-quantum algorithms, you may want to do things like, P256 isn't actually recommended by the various security agencies that don't have names anymore, at least not for their internal use. They've moved to a minimum of P384. One tends to suspect that there's a reason for that. I always look at what the security agencies do and say, I want to do at least that.
Yeah, fair enough.
They may tell other people, no, it's okay, you don't need to do this.
Yeah.
I think that I want to at least do what they're doing.
Yeah.
So if you look at NSA, GCHQ, and all of those guys, they've all bumped up their algorithms in the last couple of years. So we need to move to better pre-quantum algorithms And as part of the learnings of that, we should, people should be putting the infrastructure in place so that once, all of the stuff around post-quantum algorithms is settled, there is how to migrate. It's sort of like key rotation. When we originally did SAML, people rotated their signing keys once a year, and every time they did it, it broke. And involved a whole bunch of people running around. You've probably been through this experience. When I was doing OpenID Connect, I said, the way around that is, why don't we get people to rotate keys every day or every week, so that if you don't have an automated way of doing that, you're going to be constantly broken, and your developers are going to be motivated to fix it.
Yeah.
If it only breaks once a year, somebody can manually fix it. If it breaks every day, you're going to automate it and
there's
fix
some
it
good
properly.
solutions out there, especially with the multiple keys for signing and then one falling off and a new one replacing. There's like some really good ways to mitigate around those now.
Right.
It was nice because it does talk to the need for keeping things secure, because most, like, your developers are lazy. They want to get their job. I have a ex-colleague who says developers want to get their job done and then they want to go home and for you to leave them alone. So like if it is once a year, they're going to rotate it once a year, and then they're going to deal with the problem in the year. So what's the quantum, how quickly are we getting there? Because I'm not following much of that. How quickly are we getting there? I mean, I don't know if our listeners are as well.
So the sort of set of algorithms are, at least an initial set of ones, have been selected by, in Europe and North America or the US aren't completely agreed on things, but we're now at the point where the algorithms, we can get to interoperable implementations, but we still have, from somebody, as somebody who works on hardware and HSMs, etc., we don't have any post-quantum HSMs yet. So rushing out to deploy post-quantum stuff and leaving your post-quantum keys laying around on a hard disk, you may not, rushing to deploy things that are, you don't have the entire life cycle management around yet, may actually, give people, and you're giving traditional threat actors a leg up, potentially. So, in order to deploy post-quantum stuff, we actually need to build the appropriate things into HSM so that you can store these private keys securely, etc. If we go back to key rotation, the you have to balance, how long it's going to take somebody to actually break a given signing key, as an example, versus how long you intend to use it. So if you have a deployment mechanism where you're rotating your keys once a day or once a week, there really isn't, until we get dramatically faster post-quantum computers, in many decades, if you're an attacker and you have, say, a state actor that has access to the leading edge post-quantum computer, you're going to go after some long-lived key. You're not going to go after a key that rotates every day. So in your deployments, you can, by increasing the key sizes, by rotating your keys on a regular basis, you can actually mitigate a bunch of the post-quantum threats, so that at least somebody else gets broken first, which is,
it's like the new approach to MFA. It's like, can you protect these endpoints with some security mechanism that makes it a little more harder for the bad actors to act bad on it?
They could go attack somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So by increasing your key sizes, by rotating your keys more often, you become a less interesting target, because likely your key will have rotated before their post-quantum computer has broken it, because it's still going to take weeks, months, years. Once somebody can actually do it, on a reasonable key size, it's still going to take a long time. So, the first, if it were me and I had a big post-quantum computer and I were evil, I would go after the U.S. Department of Defense's 128-bit RSA key. Think of what fun you could have being able to sign in as anyone in the U.S. military, as an example.
Do we have any military people listening? Please contact John at
Well,
Yubico.
it's not like I haven't told the DoD and various other people. Yeah. So the Department of Defense is updating their key sizes to 4K RSA. God help us all. There is institutional inertia. And even I've done work with former Soviet countries, getting them to switch off of the Soviet ghost algorithms because they still have laws requiring that they be used. Like, really? Do you want to be using algorithms that are specified by people that are actually currently bombing you? This could be a bad idea, but we can't use other stuff because our laws don't. No. So it takes a while to get over some of the oh yes, but we have a regulation, we must use this.
They become part of the problem. They solved a problem to begin with, and now have become a bottleneck in the security.
I've been lobbying that people like NIST need to allow algorithms in FIPS approved devices like ED 25519 algorithms that don't necessarily have and now I love the NSA, guys, I do. But some people are suspicious. I'm actually speaking at one of their things in a couple of weeks, but people are with or without merit suspicious of some of the P-curve algorithms. So there are other alternatives that are better than the Russian-derived ghost algorithms, P250 or ED25519. The Germans love Brain Pool, which is nice but has horrible performance hits. So getting people to move to newer algorithms, is hard and takes time. It took us something like 10 years to get rid of SHA-1 hashing. And I'm sure somebody's still using it out there.
But there's got to be people still using it.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting points in the discussion that you have about algorithm here is that I think 80% of developers and IT people who use JWT do not even understand the kind of algorithm they are based on. I think 9 months ago, we launched a feature like we do authorization. We launched a feature to do authorization, verifying tokens from the front end. So if you want to call backend services from your front end, you don't need to have this proxy to verify the JWT. We will verify that for you and do also authorization. So you can, for example, if you want to call Twilio from your front-end app, you don't need to have this backend to authenticate you to Twilio. You just tell us, this is the one I want to call, and this is the users I want to let them call that. So we are doing also we are verifying tokens as part of the authorization check. And most of the developers that we ask them if they can provide us the JWTs, contact the support and say, what is JWT? I know that I have JWT. I don't know what is JWTs. And we say, okay, so you should go to your authentication provider and they have JWTs. And they are, I don't know, I can't find it. And I say, it's public on the internet. Every authentication provider actually published that. Do you think is that good or bad that developers actually do not know how their tokens work or what token or what algorithm enable it?
It's probably not ideal, but it's probably inevitable at some level of success. So if you ask most people how their car motor works, they say they turn the key. They're not going to be able to tell you the details of how fuel injection versus carburation works. So at some level, once technology is adopted, people stop understanding how the details work. They just take it as for granted. So hopefully, when we did JWS, we set some minimums, which was ECDSA P256, which was considered to be way overkill for the time. Now, as I say, it's probably not what I would choose to use myself for anything that I wanted to be seriously secure. It's okay if you rotate the keys on a daily basis, but yeah. It's hard to expect people to understand. Most people aren't cryptographers, and most cryptographers you can't actually have any kind of reasonable conversation with. It's real cryptographers like standing in closets and talking to their shoes. They're an interesting group. So there has to be engineers in between that sort of mediate and provide guidance. So we try and do that as part of the OpenID Foundation's conformance tests and various other places. But as you say, with JWTs being used so many places, people may not understand all of the security consequences, etc., of what they're doing.
Yeah,
And
I think that also one of the enablers of JWTs, right? So I know like one of the biggest enablers of the adoption and the easiest to use is that a website. I think auth0 own it, the jot.io, which one,
yeah,
you put a jot and it parses it in one of it's very useful website, and also that you actually don't need how to use that. But I mean, from our perspective, and that's something that Thomas already bring. People are look at the jot from the perspective they know. So from the perspective of like a storage of user entitlement, a storage of user claims, storage, etc., etc. And we are also in a world of fine-grained authorization. Want more than one dimension. Um, what kind of limitation do you think we should guide people to use JOT? I mean, if we do authentication, it's a great authentication token. It's self-validated. It's very secure, etc., etc. But we also need to give it some role in authorization. What is the role
right.
in your mind?
So Vittorio, who was at auth0, did last year or the year before did an OAuth access
Last
token
year.
profile around um, you know formalizing some of the things that you would want for interoperability around authorization tokens, which I think was some great work from him. So yeah, it really, where you start having systems that you want to be interoperable, then we really need potentially more standardization around that. You know, but most people use them in sort of internal projects. I mean, when OAuth was first developed, the access tokens were going to be opaque. That was because they were just random numbers and the all the authorization, all the resource endpoints were tightly coupled to the authorization server. Then it was later that we said, oh yeah, since they're opaque, we could pass JWTs in there, and you don't necessarily have to have a back channel between the authorization server and the resource server. And then we started looking at metadata, which would enable third parties to be able to consume a JWT that was produced by a central authorization server with multiple resource servers. And at that point, you really do need to start defining what the schema is. What do those authorizations mean when you have essentially federated authorization? which probably isn't even a term, but that's kind of what it is.
We
When you're
call it decentralized. I mean, the way that we are looking on fine-grained authorization is we really need to decouple the configuration, which is like the rules, the enforcement, which is the app, and the data, right? And tokens is part of the data, but it's only part of the data. It couldn't be the
right.
whole data, and it couldn't be the decision point, right? And
Hmm.
I mean, Thomas mentioned that, but I saw a lot of the organizations that do authorization, and I saw organizations that literally have a list of files in their tokens. They keep a list of the direct files that the user has an access, and then they can compare the new relationship. I think we should think of the JWT as a highly dynamic, secure, and comfortable place to store user entitlement and user data. And I think even make it dynamic could be even like cooler because you can have one JWT for one for the other.
Hmm. Well, like as I say with the things like SD you could have an authorization server create a single JWT, which then disclose different claims to different
Mhm.
resource servers. So, I mean, that is one of the problems
Like the
with cramming
original
too much.
meaning of OAuth, right?
Hmm?
Like the original meaning of OAuth scopes. I mean, I think one of the things that we need to invest now is like in standardizing loops because one of the things that we do a lot now is creating not sure if the infinity is the right word, but the authentication authorization need to live in a loop. You need to authenticate and then you authorize, but then you need to stronger authentication. Then you need to maybe limit scopes. Then you want a JWT that are self-authorized and stuff like that. So it could be cool if we have some sort of a JWT or like having the JWT, OAuth, and fine-grained authorization engine that live in a feedback loop. So you have a JWT, and this JWT can authorize and create a JWT for a specific use, like even one-time use JWT for a specific scope for a sensitive operation that you can't authorize just in time, etc., etc. But I mean, the things are
So,
there. You just need to model them.
so I mean, Brian Campbell and I did the um, token exchange draft in OAuth, which was kind of enables you to trade one token for another, and there's been, you know, that's been used in a number of different things, but we don't really. I know people have thought about it. You know, one hesitates to say yes, we could apply XACML to this, um, but perhaps some sort of policy enforcement language, not XACML, but giving us some of those properties is something that would be useful for people.
I saw that Jacob is writing us on tweet on LinkedIn that you can't put too much claims because it's still HTTP header. So I want to surprise Jacob and tell you that I saw people that do not put it in the header because it's large and they just send it in the body or something.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I think that the thing about JWTs, it's enabled many developers because it's simple, because it's self-validated, it's secure. But on the other end, people are like having the freedom to do whatever. And with that LinkedIn comment, I want to remind our listener we are now 5 minutes to the end of this fascinating hour. If you have any kind of questions or topics that you want to bring up, that's the time. No matter where you are watching us, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitch, whatever you are, send a comment and we'll see that and try to make it in the discussion. Yeah. I think now that we have 5 minutes and we may get some more question, I think is a good for like this trivia question. If you have a very like concise 3 points to offer now to improve JWTs, what was it?
Um, well, more or less the stuff that I'm working on, not surprisingly, post quantum and zero knowledge.
Mhm.
How can we get, like, is there specific groups that we could follow to get more information if you're interested in those things?
Sure, the OAuth work group is where SDJWT is being developed. The post-quantum stuff would be the COSE work group at IETF, and of course the JOSE work group at IETF for JWP, or JSON Web Proofs.
Got another question in about the token exchange. What was the product you used token exchange with? I think this was more.
I think is in the context of the large token with the list file I described. So it wasn't us. I mean, it was like a permit customer that, you know, we saw their current authorization, and they just have specific for the authorization part, they use tokens from the identity provider, and they just push the whole body to it. And when it gets larger, then you put it in other, like not in the header, not specifically in Keycloak. I think it was like
right. So that in OAuth you can do either. There is a token exchange specification that's part of OAuth that allows you to exchange a SAML token for a JWT, or one JWT for another JWT. So it enables you to, say, have one application that gets a JWT where it's the audience, and then talks to an endpoint that can then trade that for a different JWT that may allow it to get access to some different microservice, etc. It is kind of an idea lifted a bit from WS Trust, for those that remember that. But we do have, so that is part of OAuth, and a number of products, probably Auth0 and Ping have implementations of it. I don't know who else off the top of my head.
So other than that, what would you like to leave with? What's going on with Yubico? How are they? What's some of the new stuff you're working on and excited to see from the product line there?
Well, we have new biometric keys coming out. I guess been announced in the next couple of weeks. There's updates to the product line coming with more more discoverable credentials. The number of places that we're reaching critical mass with pass keys. I will explain to folks that pass keys are a credential. A security key is a storage device. So security keys store pass keys, and yeah, we suck at marketing. Now that Apple is has decided to deploy WebAuthn and stuff, people should be using hardware security keys to fundamentally secure their Google and Apple accounts using Google Advanced Protection, or turn on hardware keys for your Apple account, which is supported. Being able to use the Apple Passkey Manager is super convenient. Google is rolling out all of that functionality as well. But people who are tempted to use the software passkey providers should really secure the backing account with something that isn't going to get them phished.
Yeah, and Google, that's like they walk you through that pretty easily as well. So all these providers, you should certainly do it. It's great advice.
You're back. Sorry, something happened to our connection.
That's great advice. Protecting your account, that's the weakest point. People don't realize that if you have a bad password for Gmail, then everything that is attached there could be a weak point, and you might as well turn on.
Yeah, the other thing that's coming out in the new keys that may be relevant to developers is support for 4K RSA keys for code signing. I know that's an ask that a lot of developers have made. So the new keys will support 4K RSA.
Awesome.
Well, we got to the end of the hour. That was super fun, and again, I'm still excited, because JWT is a very basic core. I'll say that from my developer relation perspective, even though we do authorization, JWT is one of the popular keywords. If I want a successful content, I'm creating something around JWT and some other keywords, but JWT is definitely
If
the
you
one that bring opinions, bring people around the table, which is
you want to
very
fire
good.
up the community, man, you talk about JWTs in the wrong way, man.
Yeah,
Well, thanks for having me as your token guest. Um,
sure.
that's a
Yeah,
bad
it's
joke.
an honor. How many
Hey,
times you use that joke?
that's the first time.
Oh man, that's a good one. Yeah,
I've never, I've, I've never been a token guest in this sense before.
Actually, I just tweet our live stream and share that this is one of the JWT Co-inventors. That a friend just replied me and say you should like prove that this is him,
Prove that I'm me?
like verify
I think
credential
I think the
token.
conversation has proven that John Bradley is John Bradley.
Yeah,
Yeah,
self validated. We
I
can see
don't
the token
I
in
don't
the
tend to
lens.
blend in all that well for some reason.
Oh yeah.
That is.
John, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having
A
me.
good one. Bye.
Ciao, everyone.